It crackled with static, then silence. General Marks Kowalski stared at the tactical display, watching red dots converge on Firebase Delta like blood drops on white paper. The mountain outpost housed 43 Marines, cut off for 6 days after insurgents destroyed the only access road with improvised explosives. Supply drops had failed. Helicopter extraction was impossible in the storm. The nearest friendly forces were 70 miles away across hostile. They were requesting immediate air support, Lieutenant Hayes reported, his voice tight with concern. Enemy forces estimated at battalion strength, closing from 3 directions. Kowalski rubbed his temples. The weather had grounded everything. Patty helicopters sat useless in their hands, rotors chained against 50-knot winds. Fixed-wing aircraft couldn't operate in these conditions, visibility near zero, wind shear that would tear wings off jets. The storm system stretched for hundreds of miles, a meteorological fortress protecting the enemy's advance. What about the warthogs? Hayes asked quietly. General shook his head. A-10s are tough, but they're not magic. Nobody flies in the weather. He paused, studying satellite imagery that showed the storm's eye wall. Besides, our closest Thunderbolt squadron is at Kandahar. Even if they could get airborne, they'd never make it here alive. Burst from the radio again. This time, a different voice emerged, confident, almost casual, with a slight southern drawl that seemed completely out of place in the chaos. Or this is Reaver 6-1, requesting immediate clearance for emergency flight operation. Exchanged glances with Kowalski. Nobody had authorized in-flights. The airfield's control tower had been shut down hours ago due to weather conditions that violated every safe protocol in the manual. 6-1 native on clearance, the tower operator responded. All aircraft grounded. Repeat, all aircraft grounded. The tower, Reaper 6-1 is wheels up in 2 minutes regardless. Tell the Marines at Delta that cavalry's coming. The command center's reinforced windows. They heard it, the unmistakable whine of a turbofan engine spooling up. Someone was actually attempting takeoff in conditions that had grounded the entire Air Force. Kowalski grabbed binoculars and rushed to the observation deck. Hayes closed behind. Sheets of drying rain, they watched a single A-10 Thunderbolt taxi toward the runway. Lightning illuminated its distinctive twin engines and straight wings, the aircraft appearing ghost-like in the storm. The plane turned onto the active runway, engines growing louder despite the howling wind. Jesus Christ, Hayes whispered, they're actually doing it. Accelerated in darkness, its navigation light disappearing almost immediately into the wall of rain and cloud. Within seconds, even the engine noise faded beneath the storm's fury. Kowalski lowered his binoculars, wondering if he just witnessed either the most heroic or most foolish act of his 30-year career. The display still showed red dots closing on Firebase Delta, but now, somewhere in that maelstrom of wind and lightning, a lone pilot was racing through darkness toward a battle that would determine whether 43 Marines lived or died. The general had no idea who was flying that aircraft, but he suspected he was about to find out what real courage looked like. Storm raged on, indifferent to human desperation, but in its heart something was moving, something with teeth and determination, carrying hope on wings of titanium and steel. The Marines at Firebase Delta were about to discover that reinforcements sometimes came in the most unexpected forms, piloted by those the military had taught to fight but never taught to quit. It rolled across the airfield like a flare, and General Kowalski realized he was holding his breath. A-10 Thunderbolt, called sign Reaver 6-1, carved through turbulence that would have shred smaller aircraft. Inside the cockpit, Major Catalina Reaper Vasquez fought controls that bucked like an angry horse, her hands stayed to fight G-forces that threatened to tear the aircraft apart. The instrument panel glowed in the darkness, altitude readings jumping erratically as wind shear caught the plane's wings. It struck close enough to illuminate the cockpit in stark white, revealing a face carved from stone and determination. Vasquez had flown combat missions over 3 continents, but nothing quite like this. The weather radar showed solid red ahead, a wall of destruction that sensible pilots avoided. She flew straight into it. Firebase Delta, this is Reaper 6-1, she transmitted, adjusting frequency to cut through atmospheric interference. Package inbound. Give me a sitrep. Response came back broken, fragments of words scattered by static. Taking heavy fire from coordinates, need immediate ammunition running low. Good enough. The Marines were dying, and she was their only chance. The A-10's GPS struggled to maintain lock through the electrical storm, but Vasquez navigated by instinct and experience, following mountain ridges that existed only in her memory, and on maps she studied until they became part of her soul. Craft shuddered as another wind gust caught its high wings. Most pilots would have turned back, declaring the mission impossible. But Vasquez had spent 12 years proving that impossible was just another word for Tuesday. The other pilots called her Reaper not because she brought death to enemies, though she certainly did that, but because she harvested victories from situations where hope had already died. Earned her reputation the hard way, flying close air support missions that others considered too dangerous or too precise. While male pilots competed for glory runs against high-value targets, Vasquez specialized in the dirty work, danger-close fire support, troops in contact, emergency evacuation cover. The missions nobody else wanted, the ones where failure meant watching friendlies die. And had never quite known what to do with her. She was too aggressive for peacetime, too independent for peacetime politics, too good at her job to ignore. So they gave her the worst assignments and watched in growing admiration as she turned disaster into victory again and again. It was different, though. Tonight, she was flying alone in conditions that violated every regulation, toward a battle that would test everything he'd learned about courage, skill, and the thin line between heroism and suicide. Storm tried to claim her, wind shear drying the A-10 like a stone before thermals caught the wings and threw her skyward. She rode the turbulence like a bronco rider, feeling the aircraft's limbs without crossing them, understanding that the Thunderbolt was built for exactly this kind of punishment. Breaks in the cloud cover, she glimpsed terrain features that matched her mental map. Firebase Delta was 15 minutes ahead, nailed in a valley where 43 Marines were discovering what it meant to face overwhelming odds with nowhere to run. Vasquez armed her weapon systems, the infamous GAU-8 Avenger cannon that gave the A-10 its legendary bite, plus a full load of rockets and bombs. The aircraft carried enough firepower to level a small city, but first she had to reach the battle alive. It illuminated the storm clouds around her like artillery flashes, and Mayor Catalina Vasquez smiled grimly. The weather wanted a fight, she'd give it one. But first she had Marines to save. Delta perched on a rocky outcrying like a medieval fortress, sandbags and razor wire creating desperate circles of defense against the approaching storm of violence. Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos pressed his eye to the sill of his M4 rifle, watching muzzle flashes bloom in the dark below like deadly fireflies. Movement 2 o'clock, he called to his squad. Looks like a full company made more. Sergeants had been probing their defense for hours, testing weak points, drawing fire to identify weapon position. It was textbook tactics, the kind of patient, methodical assault that ground down defenders until ammunition ran low and exhaustion took hold. Santos had seen it before in Fallujah, in Helen Province, in a dozen forgotten valleys where Marines learned that the enemy was patient and smart and willing to die for ground that mattered to nobody except the people fighting over it. Colonel James Ironside, Mackenzie crouched beside the firebase command bunker, coordinating defense positions through his radio headset. At 52, he was older than most combat commanders, a Mustang officer who'd earned his rank through enlisted service and battlefield promotions. His Marines trusted him because he'd been where they were, in the mud, under fire, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between going home and going into the ground. "We got moving on the South Ridge too," Corporal Daves reported, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "They're trying to surround us." He nodded grimly. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. His 43 Marines held good defensive positions, but they were outnumbered at least 3-1, probably worse. Ammunition was running low after 6 days of intermittent contact. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted. The storm had prevented resupply or evacuation, leaving them isolated in hostile territory with winter. "Our ammo situation?" he asked his senior NCO. "Good, sir," Gunnery Sergeant Prickcole replied bluntly. "Maybe 2 hours of sustained fire less if they hit us hard." As he studied the tactical map spread across an ammo crate, the firebase controlled the high ground, which was good. But high ground didn't matter when you were surrounded and running out of bullets. The insurgents knew it too. They could afford to be patient, to bleed his Marines slowly until collapse became inevitable. A static crowd, then a voice emerged from the chaos. "Firebase Delta, this is Reaper 6-1. Package inbound. Give me a sit-rep." He grabbed the handset so quickly he nearly dropped it. "Air support, in this weather. Reaper 6-1, Firebase Delta. We are taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Estimate battalion size any force closing our position. We are in danger of being overrun. How copy?" "Copy Delta. What's your ammunition status?" "Low. Maybe 2 hours of sustained engagement." "Can you mark any positions with illumination?" Kenzie looked at Cole, who was already moving toward the mortar position. "Affirmative, Reaper. We can light them up." "Standing, I'm 15 minutes out. Keep your heads down and mark those targets. Cavalry's coming." Action went dead, leaving Mackenzie staring at the radio in disbelief. Someone was actually flying in the storm, flying toward his position with the intent of engaging a superior enemy force in conditions that should have grounded everything with wings. Never heard the call sign Reaper 6-1 before, but right now he didn't care if it was Chicky-U's ghost. Help was coming, and that meant his Marines might actually live to see tomorrow. "Oh," he called, "get ready to mark targets. We've a close air support inbound." Gunny's eyebrow rose. "In the weather, sir." "Apparently so." He grinned fiercely. "Well, I'll be damned. Somebody up there likes us after all." Sergeants moved through the mountain terrain like shadows given citizens, their knowledge of the local geography turning every ridge and gully into a potential ambush site. They had been playing this assault for weeks, studying the firebase's defense position, mapping patrol routes, waiting for the perfect storm, literally, isolate the Americans and finish them. For Khalid Al-Shi watched the battle develop through night vision binoculars, his weathered face impassive as his fighters maneuvered in position. He had learned patience during years of fighting Soviet forces, then Americans, then whoever else claimed dominion over his mountains. The terrain favored defenders, but only if they had ammunition and support. The Americans had neither. "South approach is clear," his lieutenant reported through the radio. "Second company is in position." She nodded. His plan was simple and effective. Simultaneous assault from 3 directions, overwhelming the American defenders through superior numbers and concentrated fire. The storm would prevent air support or reinforcement. By dawn, Firebase Delta would be a smoking ruin, its occupants either dead or captured for propaganda videos. It fought Americans before and respected their individual courage, but courage without support was just another way to die gloriously and pointlessly. These Marines had been abandoned by their commanders, left to face impossible odds while politicians thousands of miles away debated budgets and withdrawal timelines. "Company reports ready," another voice crackled through his radio. "Excellent. Begin final approach. Remember, we want prisoners if possible. Dead Americans make martyrs. Living ones make better television." As fighters began moving forward, automatic weapons ready, rock-propelled grenades armed and turreted. The Americans would fight well. They always did. But mathematics was inexorable. 43 Marines against more than 150 experienced insurgents, with nowhere to run and no support coming. Rashid had seen this story before. It always ended the same way. As his force closed on their prey, something changed in the next above. The storm's rhythm shifted, its howling wind carrying a new sound, high-pitched, mechanical, growing steadily louder despite the weather's fury. "Craft engines?" Rashid lowered his binoculars, frowning. No pilot would be insane enough to fly in these conditions. The storm had grounded everything for hundreds of miles, creating a protective umbrella over his operation. Yet the sound was unmistakable, growing closer with each passing second. "Units maintain position," he ordered, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "Prepare for probable air attack." Fighters checked their shoulder-fired missiles, weapons designed specifically to down low-flying aircraft. But mills were useless if you couldn't see the target, and visibility was near zero. The storm that had isolated their American prey might also shield them from this unexpected threat. His sound grew louder, echoing off mountain walls in a way that made it impossible to determine direction or distance. Whatever was approaching, it was big, powerful, and apparently unconcerned about weather conditions that had grounded entire air forces. Rashid felt the first stirring of unease. In his experience, Americans who did impossible things were usually worth worrying about. Catalina Vasquez descended through the storm like an avenging angel wrapped in tame and fury, the A-10's engine screaming as she fought turbulence that hammered the aircraft from every direction. Lightning transformed the cockpit into a strolling nightmare of instruments and shadow, but her hands remained steady on the controls, her breathing slow and controlled despite flying through conditions that would terrify seasoned pilots. Forward-looking infrared system painted Firebase Delta as a cluster of heat signatures against the cold mountain stone, while any position showed as scattered red dots surrounding the defense perimeter. Even through the storm's interference, the tactical picture was clear. The Marines were surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of time. "Firebase Delta, Reaver 6-1, she transmitted, adjusting her approach angle to take advantage of the valley's wind patterns. "I have eyes on your position. Request immediate illumination of primary targets." His voice came back clear and determined. "Reaper 6-1 Delta, firing illumination now." Rounds arced into the darkness, their flares blooming like artificial stars against the storm clouds. For a few precious seconds, the battlefield was revealed in stark detail. Insurgent positions, movement patterns, the carefully coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed the Firebase within minutes. Vasquez smiled grimly and rolled the A-10 into her attack run. Insurgents heard her coming, a deep, rumbling growl that cut through the storm's noise like a predator's warning. Those with experience recognized the sound immediately, the distinct twin-engine signature of an A-10 Thunderbolt, the aircraft American ground troops called the Hog and any fighters learned to fear. Recognizing the threat and stopping it were different things entirely. Vasquez lined up her first target, a cluster of fighters positioned to assault the firebase's eastern flank. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon hung beneath her aircraft like the fang of some prehistoric monster, its 7 barrels ready to spit depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 65 per second. He squeezed the trigger. His roar was apocalyptic, sound like tearing steel magnified 1,000-fold. 30mm rounds hammered the mountainside at supersonic velocity, each projectile capable of punching through armor plating. Trees disintegrated, rocks exploded, and insurgent positions simply ceased to exist under the devastating barrage. A-10 shuddered as the cannon fired, its entire airframe designed to absorb the massive recoil. Vasquez rode out the vibration and pulled up, banging hard to avoid small arms fire that sparkled in the darkness like deadly Christmas lights. Hit on eastern position, Mackenzie reported, his voice filled with something that might have been awe. Holy shit, Reaper, that was beautiful. Your Delta, coming around for second pass. Mark your next target. Climb back into the storm's embrace, using the clouds as cover while she repositioned for another attack. The insurgents were scrambling now, their coordinated assault dissolving into confusion as they tried to track a turret that appeared and disappeared like a ghost in the machine. Firebase Delta's Marines watched in amazement as their certain death transformed into violent salvation. The lone A-10 moved through the storm like a force of nature, its pilot displaying skills that bordered on supernatural. Sergeant Santos shook his head in disbelief. Who the hell is flying that thing? But he answered, because nobody knew. But as they watched the Thunderbolt carve through impossible weather to rain destruction on their enemies, they began to understand that some questions mattered less than others. An attack run came from a completely different angle, the A-10 materializing from the storm clouds like a metallic ghost before unleashing another devastating burst from its cannon. This time, Vasquez targeted the insurgent's command position, where our Sheed was desperately trying to coordinate a defense against an enemy that refused to follow conventional rules of engagement. Units disperse, he shouted into his radio, but half his commanders were already dead or scared. The American pilot seemed to anticipate his movement, striking with surgical precision that spoke of exceptional training and instinctive understanding of ground warfare. Propelled grenades streaked skyward, their contrails visible through the rain, but the A-10 was already gone, vanished back into the storm before the weapons could lock on. Vasquez used the weather as both shield and weapon, appearing only long enough to strike before disappearing into the meteorological chaos that had initially protected her enemies. It was writing the rules of close air support, turning a natural disaster into tactical advantage through pure skill and seemingly supernatural courage. The insurgents had planned for everything except a pilot crazy enough to fly through conditions that violated every safe protocol ever written. Base Delta Reaver 6-1, how's your ammunition looking now? He checked with his squad leaders, all of whom reported the same thing. Any pressure had evaporated under the A-10's assault. Much better, Reaper. Any forces appear to be withdrawing from all directions. Active Delta, they're regrouping, not retreating. This fight isn't over yet. That's right. Through his binoculars, Mackenzie could see muzzle flashes repositioning in the distance as Al-Rashid's surviving fighters sought cover from the aerial predator that had turned their certain victory into a nightmare of exploding ordnance and screening engine. What's your fuel status, Reaper? He asked, dreading the answer. Pause. I've got time for maybe 2 more passes, then I need to head home. Ali hit like cold water. Even miracle pilots had limitations, and physics was still physics. The A-10 couldn't stay forever, and when it left, the insurgents would resume their assault with renewed fury and hard-earned respect for American air power. Did that Reaper make them count? I'm going to hit their fallback positions, try to scatter them for good. Keep your peel ready, they might get loud. Vasquez pulled the A-10 into a climb turn, gaining altitude for what would be her most dangerous attack yet. The insurgents were now actively hunting her, surface-to-air missiles armed and operators scanning the sky with deadly patience. She had surprise and weather on her side, but luck was a finite resource that she'd been spending freely. Oh, the Marines of Firebase Delta watched their guardian angel climb back into the storm, knowing they might be witnessing either the most heroic or the final act of a pilot whose name they didn't even know. In the tradition of Marines throughout history, they prepared to fight with whatever time the pilot's sacrifice had bought them, because that's what Marines did. They fought, they endured, and they never forgot the people who bled for them. The storm raged on, indifferent to human courage, but within its fury, a lone pilot was writing a chapter in the book of legends that Marines would tell around campfires for generations to come. Vasquez pushed the A-10 to its absolute limits, diving through wind shear that would have torn her aircraft apart. Her instruments screamed warnings that she ignored with the casual expert ease of someone who had learned to fly, breaking rules that other pilots considered sacred. The Thunderbolt responded like a living thing, its twin engine providing just enough power to punch through turbulence that hammered the airframe with the force of artillery strikes. It identified the insurgents' rally point, a protected valley where Al-Rashid was attempting to reorganize his scattered forces. It was a perfect defense position, sheltered from the storm and invisible to conventional air attack, but Vasquez had never been accused of being conventional. The angle was insane, nearly vertical, using gravity and the storm's downdrafts to achieve speeds that would make recovery nearly impossible. But nearly impossible was where she lived, the narrow space between heroism and suicide that defined her entire career. 100 feet above the valley floor, she pulled out of the dive and opened fire with everything she had, cannon rounds, rockets, and high-explosive bombs in a concentrated barrage that turned the insurgent position into a cauldron of destruction. The A-10 bucked and shuddered as weapon systems sailed through their loads, filling the night with thunder and lightning that had nothing to do with the narrow storm above. It lasted 12 seconds of concentrated violence that broke the back of Al-Rashid's assault force and sent survivors fleeing into the mountain. When Vasquez pulled up from her final pass, climbing back toward the relative safety of the storm clouds, Firebase Delta was secure. Ending work, Reaper 6-1, Mackenzie transmitted, his voice carrying exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. How can we ever thank you? Vasquez was quiet for a moment, already calculating fuel consumption and weather patterns for the dangerous flight home. Just doing my job, Delta. Watch yourselves out there. 6-1, this is Firebase Delta Actual. Mackenzie's voice carried formal weight now, the tone of official military business. Request, you provide your name and unit for our after-action report. The Marines of Firebase Delta won't forget what you did tonight. Paused longer this time. When Vasquez finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost reflective. Mayor Catalina Vasquez, 355th Fighter Squadron. Call sign Reaper. Tell your Marines they fought like champions tonight. After that, Mayor, safe flight home. A-10 disappeared into the storm's embrace, its engine noise fading until only the wind remained. But the Marines of Firebase Delta stood a little straighter, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary, a pilot who had flown through impossible conditions to save their lives, asking nothing in return except that they remember her name. Catalina Reaper Vasquez was already thinking about her next mission as she fought the storm toward home, unaware that she had just earned a place in Marine Corps legend. But legends, she had learned, were made by people who simply showed up when everyone else said it couldn't be done. The storm began to weaken as she flew toward base, and for the first time in hours, Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. 43 Marines would see tomorrow because she had been exactly where she needed to be, when she needed to be there. That was enough. Kowalski stood in the rain on the airfield's observation deck, watching navigation lights emerge from the storm like stars breaking through clouds. The A-10 Thunderbolt materialized from the darkness, its landing lights piercing the gloom as it lined up for final approach. The aircraft looked battered, scorched by lightning strikes, and buffeted by winds that should have been impossible to survive. Jesus, Lieutenant Hayes whispered, they actually made it back. Landing was textbook perfect despite conditions that would challenge in pilot. Vasquez brought the A-10 down with the smooth precision that marked truly exceptional aviators, her tires kissing the runway with barely a squeak before the aircraft rolled toward the maintenance hangar. Kowalski was already moving, his aides struggling to keep up as the general strode across the rain-soaked tarmac toward the aircraft. He needed to know who had just pulled off what might be the most remarkable close air support mission in modern history. A-10's engine spun down, their whine fading to silence. The canopy popped open, and Kowalski got his first look at the pilot who had flown through a storm to save 43 Marines from certain death. Catalina Vasquez was smaller than he expected, made 5'6" in her fleet suit, with dark hair pulled back in a regulating bun and brown eyes that seemed to catalog everything around her with the systematic precision of a weapons computer. She moved with the controlled economy that marked combat veterans, every gesture purposeful and measured. "Dear Vasquez," Kowalski called as she climbed down from the cockpit. Turned, snagging attention with parade ground precision. "Yes, sir. General Kowalski, I presume." "It was one hell of a flight, Mayor. Firebase Delta is secure thanks to you." Vasquez's friend didn't change. "Just doing my job, sir. The Marine did the hard part." He studied her more carefully. There was something in her bearing that spoke of battles fought in boardrooms as well as cockpits, of proving herself again and again to commanders who saw her gender before her record. He recognized the type because he'd been fighting those battles on her behalf for years, trying to get his best pilots the recognition they deserve regardless of what equipment they'd been born with. "I've been flying for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. Flying through that storm was either the bravest or the most insane thing I've ever witnessed." For the first time, Vasquez smiled, a quick expression that transformed her face from professional mask to something warmer, more human. "Sometimes there's not much difference, sir." "No," Kowalski agreed. "Sometimes there isn't." He paused, rain dripping from his cap. "I'm putting you in for a distinguished flying cross. What you did tonight saved American lives." "Respectfully, sir, I prefer you focus on getting Firebase Delta the support they need. Those Marines earned their recognition the hard way." Kowalski nodded slowly. Here was a pilot who understood that glory was secondary to mission accomplishment, that the real measure of success was bringing people home alive. It was an attitude he wished more of his officers shared. "Major, I have a feeling we're going to be working together more in the future. The 355th is lucky to have you." "Yes, sir. If there's nothing else, I need to debrief and get some maintenance time on my aircraft. She took a beating out there." Vasquez walked toward the hangar, her silhouette disappearing into the maintenance bays where ground crews were already soaring over the battle-damaged A-10. Kowalski realized he had just met one of those rare individuals who defined military excellence not through ambition or politics, but through pure competence and unshakable moral courage. Later, the storm had passed, leaving the mountains crystal clear under a sky so blue it seemed artificial after the chaos of the previous week. Firebase Delta buzzed with activity as supply helicopters finally made it through with food, ammunition, and most importantly, mail from home. The Marines moved with the loose limb confidence of soldiers who had faced death and survived, their bonds strengthened by shared experience and the knowledge that they could trust each other with their lives. Sergeant Santos sat cleaning his rifle, but his attention kept drifting to the valley where the insurgent forces had made their final stand. 3 days of aerial reconnaissance had confirmed what they all suspected. Our Sheet's assault force had been shattered beyond recovery. The survivors had melted back into the population, their coordinated military unit broken in scattered individuals with no stomach for another encounter with American air power. "We'll see her again?" Corporal Davis asked, following Santos' gaze toward the sky. "Reaper, I don't know." Santos worked the rifle's bolt, checking the action with the automatic precision of a 20-year Marine. "But I'll tell you what, I sleep better knowing there are pilots like that watching our backs." Colonel McKenzie emerged from the command bunker, a message form in his hand and an expression of mixed satisfaction and concern on his weathered face. He'd been getting reports from higher headquarters, fragments of a larger story that was still developing around their small piece of the war. "Gather around," he called to his senior NCOs. "Got some interesting news from division." Marines formed a loose circle, their attention focused on their commander with the intensity that marked professional soldiers. McKenzie had earned their respect through competence and courage, and when he spoke, they listened. "Our guardian angel has been busy. Mayor Vasquez has flown 17 combat missions in the last 6 months, all of them danger close support for troops in contact. Her kill record is impressive." "Impressive," Gunko asked. He consulted his notes. 47 confirmed vehicle kills, estimated 200 NEKIA, and 0 friendly fire incidents. She'd been pulling Marines and soldiers out of impossible situations for the better part of a year. Occasions hung in the air like smoke. 17 missions of the type they witnessed, flying in conditions and situations that other pilots considered suicidal, never losing a single American life to friendly fire despite operating in the most dangerous possible circumstances. "More," McKenzie continued. "Intel suggests the insurgents have started calling her something in their radio chatter. Malik Almont, the Angel of Death." Santos willed low. "They gave her a name, that's respect." "Or fear, Devzad." "Sometimes they're the same thing," McKenzie replied. He folded the message and tucked it into his pocket. "Point is, we were saved by someone who's been making a habit of impossible rescues. Makes you think about the people who keep us alive out here." Marines nodded, understanding passing between them without words. They had been part of something larger than their individual survival, a story that connected their small flare base to a broader narrative of courage and competence that defined the American military at its best. Above, Conrails marked the passage of aircraft too distant to identify, but every Marine looked up with new appreciation for the pilots who flew those machines. Somewhere up there, Mayor Catalina Reaper Vasquez was probably preparing for another impossible mission, another group of soldiers who would owe their lives to her skill and courage. Officers' Club at Bagram Air Base hummed with the low conversation of pilots unwinding after another day of combat operations. The room smelled of coffee, aviation fuel, and the indefinable mixture of tension and camaraderie that marked military installations in active war zones. Major Vasquez sat alone at the bar, nursing a club soda and reading intelligent briefings for tomorrow's mission. For its solitude after flights, using the time to process what had happened and prepare mentally for whatever came next. Combat flying required a particular kind of emotional discipline, the ability to compartmentalize violence and fear into manageable pieces that wouldn't interfere with split-second decision-making. Reaper Wright? The voice belonged to Captain Brad Morrison, an F-16 pilot with more confidence than flight hours and an ego that preceded him in the in-room. He slid onto the adjacent bar stool uninvited, his flight suit pristine and his manner suggesting this conversation was a favor he was doing for her. "It's my call sign," Vasquez replied without looking up from her briefing materials. "You flew through that storm the other night. Pretty gutsy for a hog driver." Morrison signaled the bartender for a beer, his tone carrying the casual condescension that some fighter pilots used when talking to anyone who didn't fly supersonic interceptors. Vasquez finally looked at him, her expression neutral but her eyes measuring, just doing the mission. "The mission," Morrison took a long pull from his beer. "Look, I get it, close air support is important work. Somebody has to fly low and slow for the grunts, but let's be honest, flying an A-10 isn't exactly air-to-air combat. It's more like aerial artillery." Conversation at nearby tables began to quiet as other pilots tuned in to what was developing. Morrison seemed oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, his attention focused on impressing what he clearly saw as a left pilot with his superior understanding of air warfare. "Thing is," he continued, "real fighter pilots handle the hard targets. Air superiority, deep strike, the missions that require actual skill. The Warthog is more about showing up and spraying bullets. Not exactly Top Gun material, you know." Vasquez closed her briefing folder with deliberate precision and turned to Faye Morrison fully. Her voice remained calm, almost conversational. "Captain, how many combat missions have you flown?" Morrison straightened, sensing that wasn't going the direction he'd expected. 14, all successful, by the way." "Congratulations, I've flown 97. She paused to let the number sink in. "How many troops in contact situations have you supported?" "Oh, that's not really what the F-16 is designed for." "Zero then? How many danger close fire missions?" Morrison's face was beginning to redden. "Look, I don't see what." "Zero." Vasquez's voice remained level, professional. "How many times have you had to identify friendly forces from hostile forces while flying at 200 feet in limited visibility with Marines depending on your accuracy to stay alive?" Officers' Club had gone completely quiet now. Every conversation stopped as pilots and support staff focused on the exchange at the bar. Morrison was beginning to realize his step.